Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Oliver-Jolly, the Membership and Account Manager at Amber and BGA. I'm very excited to welcome our guest for today's session, Jennifer Geary. Jennifer is a senior executive with over 25 years of experience in the finance, technology, risk and legal sectors, as well as not-for-profit organisations. She is also an author, speaker and mentor to emerging businesses. In this session, we'll be diving into how to be a Chief Operating Officer, the traits that make a successful COO, and perhaps helping you navigate whether it's the right fit for you. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer. And to kick off, perhaps you can provide some insight into your career path and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you, Mel. It's lovely to be here on what must be said a somewhat rainy, grim, grey autumn day, but we'll try and light it up a little bit. And thank you for having me. I feel very passionate about this role. It's not a very well documented role. And I think it's one that maybe as an MBA student, you may not be aware of and you may not be thinking of. And I think it's fantastic and worth illuminating. So in terms of how I got into it, going back to the beginning, I did a Bachelor of Commerce. So if I was doing it today, I would hope to be a member of your BGA group. And I didn't do an MBA, but I did a Master of Accounting. I felt very numeric and very into the numbers at that point, and went on to train as a chartered accountant with one of the big six, as it was then, accounting firms in Dublin. I moved, once I qualified as an ACA, I sought out a move with them to New York. I knew I wanted to work in financial services and I wanted to go somewhere other than Dublin and test myself in one of the big financial hubs of the world. And so I spent 2 years in New York before I came to London in 2002. And so from there, I spent 13 years in one of the big banks, Barclays. And that was a really great learning ground for me. I didn't come in on any kind of graduate rotation scheme, but in the 13 years I was there, I did 5 different roles. So I sought out new experiences along the way. I rotated around. I started out in the risk area and I moved into program management, into technology, and I was chief of staff twice to 2 quite senior roles in Barclays at the time. So that takes us up to about 2017. At that point, banking was going through a pretty tough time generally. I think it reputationally, there were issues and there was a very heavy compliance agenda. And I felt the need to do something a little different, a little more wholesome, a little more appealing, I guess, to my value set. And I initially applied to maybe go and help on an audit committee or a finance committee of a not-for-profit. And through a very fortunate set of circumstances, an opportunity to be interim COO at a not-for-profit came along, and it was Save the Children UK, which is a huge charity and well known across the world. And they needed an interim for 9 months as maternity cover, and I convinced Barclays to let me go. At that point, and hence the genesis for the book, I'd had a pretty good background. I had finance, I had technology, I had some legal, I had some program delivery, strategy, I'd been chief of staff, but nothing prepared me for that first COO role. And I couldn't believe the range of disciplines that one role was expected to cover. And like many of you, the first thing I do is I go and look for a book, look for research, and the book didn't exist. And this is supposedly the number 2 role in the organization, the second most senior role in the organization. So I dug really deep. I relied on my network of experts and friends and colleagues that I built up over the years, researched like crazy, and managed to, I think I ended up spending 2.5 years there. So it was a success. I stayed on past the interim period and worked, it was a very successful engagement for 2.5 years, which is then what prompted me to write the book. So, and we'll come back to that. Since then, I've been largely in fintech and financial services software. I've been a COO again, a chief risk officer, and a managing director of a software company, as well as writing some books. And that brings us up to today.
Fantastic, thank you. So incredibly varied and
sure.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think some people might have a general idea, and it may be a silly question, but what does a COO actually do on a day-to-day basis? And what are the disciplines that they need? Yeah. And it's I don't know, maybe it is a silly question, maybe it's not, but actually I was asking around our office earlier, and a lot of people, we're not actually quite sure.
Not so sure, right? And there's no one standard role. I think that's one of the things that's very confusing about a COO role. Chief Operating Officer, obviously, so it's got some sort of element of operations to it. But as I say, I counted 16 things that I was responsible for. So there's some quite foundational things where you work in support of the chief executive and also your C-suite colleagues. So things like making sure the strategy is clear and optimized and cascaded clearly through the organization. Taking responsibility for the culture in the organization to make sure that's as positive and reinforcing and helpful a culture as it can be to the aims of the organization. Execution, so making sure that all of those great ideas and strategies at leadership level actually cascade properly, that they're all connected up like sort of muscles in the body from the brain all the way through. And then getting into the more technical areas, and it does vary. There is no sort of one set of disciplines, but they can include things like technology, people, finance, operations. I'm not going to remember them all. Risk, supply chain, safeguarding. There's 16. And in fact, the book has been out a few years now. And occasionally someone has written to me and said, well, I didn't have responsibility for the people function. Or, oh, you've left out R&D and I had R&D, research and development. But in the main, it seems to have stood the test of time and it seems to have been useful to people along the way.
Mm-hmm. So moving up from a functional expert into a C-suite role, how significant is this shift?
It's massive. And the old adage of what got you there won't get you to the next stage really does apply. So, and to your students out there, I mean, the MBA and a lot of the business degrees are very generalist to begin with anyway. So you are getting a broad grounding, but often people progress through to the executive levels because they've been really excellent at a particular discipline. So you might be really good at finance or legal or risk management or whatever it is. And that technical depth and that technical expertise has got you a great degree of success in your career. But all of a sudden you find yourself at this C-suite table and they're not interested in your functional expertise anymore. They expect that your department will run smoothly and functionally and not be an issue. And what becomes more important is understanding the agendas of the people around your table, disciplines that you may never have had exposure to before, and understanding the push and pull and the different requirements of people around the table, and then finding areas of mutual understanding, mutual cooperation, so that you can do the right thing for the organization as a whole. So it's really a whole new set of skills. Mm-hmm. And the temptation is always to fall back and to rely on the things that you understand, the stuff that you feel very secure on, but you've got to start delegating that and letting that go and learning a new set of skills.
Sure. And what advice do you have for professionals kind of aspiring to move up into that C-suite position?
Mm-hmm. I would say a little bit like I did my best to do, try to move around your organizations, move into different roles, keep learning, keep expanding, because it is really that multidisciplinary focus that is so valuable in the role of the COO. It's not an overweight on any particular expertise or technical skill. So the broader your experience, the more you've seen, the more you understand of your operations, of your product development, the better equipped you'll be to make the right trade-offs when you reach that role.
So having worked in both for-profit and the NGO space, what are some of the key differences between the two?
I was really struck by, obviously a change of culture between the for-profit and the not-for-profit space, but everything from people's engagement with the strategy and the mission to how they responded to being asked to do something was completely different. So I was used to, frankly, a very obedient kind of a corporate setting where strategy was set at the top and the budgets were set and they were cascaded down and people sort of did what they were asked to do. And if they did well and if they cooperated and if they were seen as a good team player, they usually got well recognized and rewarded at the end of the year. In contrast, in the not-for-profit space, people, first of all, usually take a salary cut to be in that space anyway. So they feel that they've given something of themselves already in seeking to join a mission that they really identify with. So their identification with that mission is really, really important to them. And they also bring, I guess, a degree of opinion as to how things should be done. Mm. And so it wasn't enough to say, we're going to go and do this, because people would turn around and come up to me and say, well, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I really had to work hard to develop that muscle whereby I really explained and outlined, look, we're all aligned. This is the mission. This is what we're trying to do. This is why we believe this is the best course of action. We did consider A, we did consider B, but we've thought about this and we really believe that this is going to get us in the right place. So you had to work an awful lot harder to recruit people to your mission.
Yeah, I see. And I guess perhaps that caused some conflict as well, I suppose, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, one of your roles as a leader is to allow a space for that discussion to happen, for people to feel that they've been heard, but then to say we've taken those thoughts into consideration, and now we're going to move forward in this way.
And kind of leading on from that, how does leadership and decision making kind of differ between the two sectors?
I think there's still, in large not-for-profit organizations, there still has to be leadership. There still has to be a strategy. In fact, one of the things I was brought in to do was to help the organization define its 15-year strategy and put a 3-year financial plan behind that with the help of the rest of the team. So those disciplines still apply and still have to apply if you're going to be careful with the money that's been invested in a not-for-profit organization as well. So you have to be just as careful, if not arguably more careful, with the funds and with how they get spent and with making sure that they line up behind the strategy. So a lot of the principles that your students are learning now apply just as much in the not-for-profit space as they do in the for-profit space. But as I said before, there is a very different culture and there's a different way of getting things done, and you have to adapt your style, quite a bit, I think.
Which culture did you prefer working in?
Oh, I can't say. I all the organizations that I've worked in have brought me something and have, hopefully I've helped along the way, and I've definitely learned along the way. So I've no regrets about any of them. I enjoyed them all in their own way. Yeah.
And what would you say are some good character traits of a COO?
So one of the things I wanted to put in the book, because I realized that it was making demands on me personally. So I wanted to put into the book what I thought some of those traits were that particularly exemplified the COO. So I think a huge amount of resilience. It's not a task. It's not a role that's obviously or regularly sort of rewarded or recognized. People expect operations of the organization to run smoothly. So when they do run smoothly, it's sort of expected. And then when they don't run smoothly, you're often the first one in the firing line, or certainly the one who's expected to resolve it. So it's quite a thankless task, and you need to come with a huge amount of personal resilience, I think. An execution focus, I think, is really important. So not just getting stuck in strategy or theory, but thinking about how to get things done. And also I write about sort of a hacking mentality. And what I mean by that is seeing things and how they're working and seeing ways to optimize them and to make them work better. I think if you're someone who looks at things and goes, God, that could be so much, even a coffee queue, and kind of going, they could really do so much better here. I think that sort of hacking mentality, as I call it, along the way. You need to be a generalist. This is not an area that's overly focused. It changes rapidly, and you need to be as comfortable in one area as another. And finally, I've said you need to be very human, and you need to be self-aware. And because the role certainly challenged me like no other I'd been to before, and I needed to draw on all my personal resources as well as support. I had a coach, all that kind of thing, to make sure that I brought the best of myself to the role.
Mm-hmm. And I guess with being human and being self-aware, not all, but some of the other sort of skills that you mentioned could perhaps be taught or learned. But I think that one is a bit more of a personality trait, right? Like, do you think, or?
I think everybody can benefit from a little bit of coaching, or someone who can hold up the mirror to you and say, when you say this, how might this appear to somebody else? Mm-hmm. Or, do you recognize when you're feeling at your most energetic and positive versus when you feel your energy draining? So I actually think that's a skill that I probably picked up later in my career, recognizing when I was really in my flow and just optimizing everything versus when I was really finding something a drag. Mm-hmm. And I think listening to those cues and listening to your gut about what really makes you shine is really important in the choices that you make.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And are there situations where someone with COO ambitions might not be the right fit for the role?
I think it's a little bit the converse of some of the roles that I said already. Mm-hmm. If you like the limelight, if you like lots of praise, if you like to be the one out there in front, it may not necessarily be the role for you. Mm-hmm. I was very comfortable in my COO roles letting the CEO stand up, make the speech, be the one on TV. I think, particularly with Save the Children, we had a very pioneering CEO who went to all of the dangerous parts of the world and, spoke on television about those things. And he was happy to know that I was sort of back home on the ranch taking care of things. And that was a very good relationship in that sense. So I think you have to know yourself and know those things about you. I also think if you're somebody who really thrives on predictability, focus, again, it's going to be difficult for you because you can be in the middle of some very big piece of strategy or something and then all of a sudden have to deal with an urgent operational issue. So you've got to be able to multi-thread and that works for some people and doesn't work for others.
Sure. And you mentioned a bit earlier that there are quite a few different types of CEOs. So what are those different types and how do they fit with the role of the CEO?
And again, this adds to the complexity of the role, right? Because there are as many different COOs as there are CEOs. And if you just think about that, all the different chief executives, who they are, their personality traits, their strengths, their weaknesses, really the COO has to be a bit of a mirror and a bit of a complement to those skills. And the Harvard Business Review back in 2017 wrote about 7 different types of COO. And, I won't go through them all here, but there's everything from, an executor of strategies to a change agent, to a mentor, to a younger CEO, sometimes an up and coming talented CEO being that sort of older mentor, a partner, potentially the heir to the CEO role that can sometimes happen as COO, to a partner in a co-leadership model with the chief executive. So there's a number of different ways. None is right, none is wrong. In fact, you really have to tailor it to the situation at hand.
And how important would you say that relationship is between the CEO and COO? Do they work quite closely together?
Oh, it's fundamental. And when it's a good relationship and when there's trust and when there's clear delineation between the different roles, that's when it really allows you as COO to shine. So I am always an advocate of really regular communication. It doesn't have to be, long meetings, but, check-ins, obviously starting being fully aligned on what the strategy of the organization is, on what success is defined like, on how the organization is going to grow or consolidate or do whatever it is it needs to do, so that you as a COO feel on a really solid footing and you know what you need to do, and then you don't have to check in every 5 minutes on something. You've got that freedom to move, and that's when it's really successful. If you are not sure, if you're doubting yourself, or if you have a chief executive, sometimes this happens and it's frustrating, who sort of gives a different answer to the one that you gave. So I used to liken it to the if mum says no, ask dad scenario. If executives know that they can ask you, but then maybe get a different answer from the CEO, that really undermines your position. I'm fortunate not to have had that, but it's I have seen that happen, and I've seen that really sort of, undermine the role.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And moving on to your book, I would love to learn a bit more about your book, How to Be a COO. So what was kind of the main motivation and drive behind writing the book?
So as I said earlier on, it was born out of need. I couldn't believe that this hugely important role had so little written about it, and that I had to read dozens of books to try and just get a little bit of a flavour of all the different things that were there. So I resolved, in a gap between roles, I resolved to see if I had it in me to write a book. And very simply, I counted 16 disciplines. I wrote a chapter on each. I had those chapters vetted by experts in their field. So the legal chapter by a lawyer, the finance chapter by an accountant, and so on. And I put it out there almost to see if anyone disagreed with me as well. It was me saying, this is what I think the role is. This is the best view I can build up of the role. Tell me I'm wrong. And most, there was a couple of people came back and said, well, I did have this or I didn't have that. But in the main, the response has been really positive. And people have said, thank you. You've really helped me. I'm new to role, or I'm about to become a CEO. And the aim, of course, no book can make you an expert in something overnight. But the aim is to sort of arm you with enough of a working knowledge in each of the disciplines to at least know where to start, to ask some good questions. So it's been a really positive experience, and I would recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you describe the writing process, because this was your first book, right?
This is the first. Yeah.
So what was the writing process like for you, and kind of what were the main challenges that you faced?
So I I took 6 months off to write the book, and so I made it my day job. I would personally struggle, and again, huge respect to your MBA grads who might be working by day and studying by night. I would have found it very difficult, I think, to work in my full-time role and then to come home and write. So I treated it like a full-time job. I would drop my kids to school, I would come home, and I would go. And I set myself certain goals in terms of word count and so on. But, some days it flows easily, and then other days it doesn't along the way. But the aim is to keep at it, to keep putting words down. Liz Gilbert calls it clearing your throat. Sometimes you start writing and it might not be great and it might get cast aside at some point, but just get going, and eventually something good comes of it. And what I was heartened to see as well, for anyone who does, so the book is self-published. There's a whole network of experts, of editors, cover designers, formatters, who can help you produce a really professional, finished product, even when you're self-publishing.
Sure. And kind of just before we conclude, I was wondering if you could give our Amber and BGA members sort of one piece of it. In fact, I'm going to say two pieces of advice. One piece of advice on how they would go about writing a book on whatever that topic is, and then one sort of perhaps their first step into becoming a COO.
Okay. So in terms of becoming a COO, I would say position yourself in the engine room of whatever organization or sector you have a particular interest in, in finance, in operations, or customer service, or product development, or delivery. I think if you can start with an appreciation of the nuts and bolts of how, and obviously I mean that figuratively, not sometimes it'll be literally, but of how the organization creates value, of how it produces, I think that will stand to you in later years. And I suppose that point about rotate yourself around as much as you can, see as much breadth in the organization as you can. In terms of writing a book, I always give the same advice to people. If you think you have a book in mind, sketch out the table of contents. So do a big mind map. Think about all the different aspects of your topic that you want to talk about. If you can construct a really tight table of contents, if you've got plenty of structure, but also you know that you're going to be able to speak about these topics. And if you're still feeling energetic, having written your table of contents, you probably have the guts of a book in you. And a book is nothing more than 15 to 20 collections of essays, right? So if you can write a 1,500 word essay, which I know your students will be very capable of doing, if you can do that 15 to 20 times, then you've got a book.
That feels like a much less intimidating way to look at it. I think it's nice to break it down in that way.
Exactly. So you can create a book structure, you can create an internal chapter structure, and then it's not quite just filling in the gaps after that. Obviously, there is some work to it, but you feel on a much more solid footing. And of course, your students are writing all the time, so they are
absolutely
perfect candidates.
Yes. Oh, well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for a fascinating insight into what life as a COO might be like. So if our Amber and BGA members want to learn more about you, or if they want to find out where to get a copy of either of your books, where can they go for that?
www.coo-author.com is my website, or you can find me on Amazon or LinkedIn. And I love to connect with people. And if I can help with anything, I'd be delighted to.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you all enjoyed the session as much as I did.